The tide retreated, leaving the sand slick and mirror bright. Oliver walked the waterline, head bowed, scanning the debris left by the receding waves. He ignored the common clam shells and crushed bits of crab. His focus locked onto the wet sand. A flash of iridescent blue caught his eye. He knelt, fingers digging into the cold, grit-filled sediment to retrieve a perfect spiral shell. He held it up to the waning light, checked the edges for chips, then slid it into a wooden box he held tucked under his arm. He did not look at the horizon. He did not look at the gulls circling overhead. He only looked at the box. Back in his room, he set the container on his desk and opened the latch. He moved the new piece into place, aligning it with others sorted by size and hue. He adjusted the angle of each fragment until the display was precise. Once satisfied, he snapped the lock shut. He turned the key, pushed the box deep into the shadows of his desk, and made sure the door to his room was firmly latched against the rest of the house. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting thin, bright stripes across the desk. Oliver sat motionless, his fingers tracing the rim of the wooden box. He was mid-adjustment, moving a small white shell 3 millimeters to the left when the door creaked. He did not look up. He heard the soft padding of footsteps on the rug. Lucy stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the open box. Before he could react, she reached out. Her fingers hovered inches from the spiraled surface of his newest find. The air in the room seemed to sharpen. Oliver slammed his hand down over the box, his palm covering the shells completely. He shoved her arm away with a sudden, jerky motion. Lucy stumbled back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. Oliver stood, his chair skidding backward against the hardwood floor. He loomed over the desk, his jaw tight. "Stay back," he snapped. He pointed toward the hallway, his finger trembling slightly. "You will break them. Get out." Lucy hesitated, her eyes darting between his face and the locked box. She turned without a word and pulled the door shut behind her. Oliver stood alone, breathing hard, and turned the key in the lock once more. Rain drummed a steady, rhythmic beat against the window pane, the only sound in the upper floor. Oliver sat at his desk, staring at the locked box. Downstairs, the heavy front door thudded shut. He heard the muffled engine of the car pull away from the driveway, leaving the house in a hollow, pressurized quiet. He stayed in his chair, listening. The living room below was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. He shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning under him. Then, the silence shattered. A sharp, violent crack echoed through the house, followed by the sound of something hard hitting the floorboards and skittering across the wood. Oliver froze. His breath hitched in his throat. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor, and bolted toward the door. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his pulse thudding in his ears. He reached the bottom landing, his eyes darting across the living room. The air felt heavy, stagnant with a scent of damp wool and dust. He stepped into the room, his gaze locking onto the center of the floor, where the silence now felt jagged and wrong. His hands balled into fists at his sides as he braced himself for what lay ahead. The wooden box lay in pieces. Fragments of shells, once smooth and whole, were scattered across the floorboards like salt. Oliver stopped. He dropped to his knees, his fingers hovering over a jagged shard of his favorite spiral shell. It was broken in 2. Lucy stood a few feet away, her hands pressed against her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent, rhythmic gasps. Her face was flushed, wet with tears that tracked lines through the dust on her cheeks. Oliver looked up. The sight of her standing there, the source of the ruin, tightened his chest. He stood, his movements stiff and sudden. "I only wanted to see them," she whispered, the words barely escaping her throat. Oliver did not listen. He looked at the wreckage, then back at her. "You ruin everything," he roared. The sound bounced off the walls, sharp and unforgiving. Lucy flinched as if struck. She took a step back, her eyes wide, then turned and bolted toward the hallway. The sound of her footsteps faded as she slammed her bedroom door. Oliver stood alone in the center of the living room, the quiet returning with a heavy, suffocating weight. He stared at the floor, his breath hitching in his throat, surrounded by the remnants of his collection. Oliver retreated to his bedroom and shut the door. He knelt in the corner, his palms pressing against the floorboards as he swept the jagged shell fragments into a tight, uneven pile. He watched the heap for hours, his gaze fixed on the sharp edges that used to be whole. Outside, the sky shifted from gray to a bruised, heavy purple. The wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the window frame and rattling the glass in its tracks. A low rumble of thunder rolled in from the distance, vibrating through the house and shaking the desk in the center of the room. Oliver stood up and paced the length of the floor, his boots thudding against the wood in time with the rising gusts. He stopped at the window, watching the trees thrash against the darkening horizon. A bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the room in a harsh, white glare for a split second before the shadows rushed back in. The air grew dense and cold, smelling of ozone and wet earth. He sat back down on the edge of his bed, his eyes fixed on the door, listening to the rain begin to lash against the roof in heavy, irregular sheets. The house groaned under the pressure of the wind, yet he did not move. The sky outside turned a violent, bruised black. A massive crack of thunder surged directly over the roof, shaking the floorboards and rattling the glass in the window frames. Oliver sat on the edge of his bed, his knuckles white as he gripped the fabric of his blanket. The house groaned under the pressure of the wind. Then, the lights flickered once, twice. A final, blinding flash of lightning illuminated the room in a stark, skeletal white, and then the power died completely. The hum of the house vanished, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Pitch darkness flooded the room, thick and absolute. Oliver did not move. He blinked, but the shadows were impenetrable, erasing the walls and the corners of the desk. He felt the cold air draft across the floor, sensing the house shudder again as another gust hammered against the exterior. The lack of light stripped away his orientation. He kept his eyes locked toward the door, straining to hear anything above the rain, but the storm had muffled the world. He remained motionless, his breath shallow, feeling the weight of the house pressing down on him in the dark. A faint scratching sound came from the hallway. Oliver held his breath, his muscles coiled, until a narrow beam of white light sliced through the black, sweeping across the floor and landing on his boots. The door creaked inward. Lucy stood in the frame, her hand steady as she held the flashlight. Her eyes were red, the skin around them puffy, but she did not hesitate. She walked into the room, her footsteps muffled by the carpet, and sat down on the edge of his bed. She angled the light toward the wall, creating a soft, reflected glow that illuminated the space between them. Oliver watched her, his grip on the blanket slowly loosening. The silence in the room changed, shifting from oppressive to heavy with unspoken weight. He looked at the floor, then at the beam of light dancing on the plaster, and finally at his sister. The sharp, jagged anger that had fueled his earlier shouting felt hollow now, drained away by the sheer simplicity of her presence. He opened his mouth, his throat tight, and shifted his weight to face her properly. The rain continued to drum against the roof, but the frantic, pounding rhythm of his own pulse had finally slowed to a steady, rhythmic thrum. Oliver stared at his hands, the light from the flashlight catching the lines on his palms. The silence stretched, filled only by the relentless drumming of rain against the wooden shingles above. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and the words he had held back in his frustration felt heavy in his chest. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was raw, barely rising above the sound of the storm outside. "I should not have yelled at you." He watched her shoulders drop, the tension leaving her frame as she exhaled. Lucy moved closer, leaning her head against his shoulder. The flashlight beam stayed steady, illuminating a small circle on the wall that served as their only anchor in the dark. Oliver did not move away. He sat still, allowing the weight of her presence to replace the need for his solitary treasure. The storm continued to lash the house, but the erratic rhythm of the wind no longer triggered his panic. They remained side by side, listening to the water cascade down the gutters, the cold air of the room warming with the simple, shared act of sitting together. The pride that had defined his afternoons felt distant, replaced by the quiet, steady reality of the moment. Morning light filtered through the window, exposing the floor littered with jagged remnants of the shell collection. Oliver knelt by the pile, his fingers brushing against a sharp, broken edge. He reached for the broom, then stopped. He pulled a tube of glue from his desk drawer instead. Lucy sat on the floor opposite him, watching as he pushed a few pieces toward the center of a cardboard frame. She picked up a spiral fragment, turning it over in her palm before aligning it with a flat, iridescent shard. Oliver applied a bead of glue, pressing the pieces together until they held. They worked in silence, the rhythm of their hands replacing the earlier chaos. Lucy sorted the pieces by color, passing them to him one by one. He adjusted the placement, creating a mosaic that looked nothing like the original shells, yet possessed a new, structured beauty. The frustration that had once surrounded the collection vanished, replaced by the mechanical focus of the task. They spent the hours filling the frames, the cardboard surfaces disappearing under the weight of the design. By noon, the floor was clear, and two finished patterns rested on the desk, marking the shift from what was lost to what they had built together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the golden light stretched across the desk, illuminating the completed mosaic frames. Oliver placed one frame in the center of his workspace, then turned to Lucy and handed her the second. He watched her face light up, a wide smile breaking across her features as she traced the patterns they had designed together. In that moment, the sharp edges of his old obsession dulled. The pride he had once felt for his private collection seemed small and hollow compared to the warmth of her presence. He stood up and walked to the corner, picking up the wooden box that had contained his secrets for so long. He set it down on the floor, leaving the lid propped wide open, exposing the empty space inside. He walked to the bedroom door, grasped the handle, and pulled it back, leaving it fully open to the hallway. He looked back at his sister, who was still admiring the frame in her hands. He did not ask her to leave, and he did not reach for the key. He stepped away from the door, leaving it unlatched, and sat down beside her to start a new project. The barrier was gone.